The station called Harmony Prime floated in the dark space between three star systems. It was bigger than most cities on Earth, with white metal walls that curved up into domes and towers. Thousands of lights blinked across its surface like distant stars. Ships from 47 different worlds were docked along its massive arms, each one different from the next. Some looked like crystals, others like living creatures, and some seemed to be made of pure light. Inside the main council chamber, beings from across the galaxy were gathering for something that had never happened before. They called it the Universal Music Exchange. Every species that belonged to the Galactic Council had been invited to bring their finest musical achievement. For most of them, this meant bringing machines. Very advanced machines that could create perfect sound. The chamber itself was enormous. The ceiling stretched up so high that clouds could have formed under it. Windows wrapped around the curved walls, showing the stars outside. In the center was a stage made of some material that seemed to glow from within. Rows of seats rose up on all sides, each section designed for different types of beings. Some needed water, others needed to float, and some were just energy that needed special containment fields. The Velkari arrived first, as they usually did. They were crystalline beings who looked like walking sculptures made of diamond and sapphire. Their leader, Jelvar, stood nearly 3 meters tall. His body caught the light and split it into rainbows that danced across the floor. Behind him, other Velkari carried a large transparent case. Inside it, geometric shapes floated and rotated slowly. These were their resonators, machines grown over centuries in the core of their home world. They could produce sound so pure that they existed at the edge of what physics allowed. The Thryn came next. They were shorter than humans, with gray skin that looked like stone. But they weren't made of stone at all. Each Thryn was actually a colony of billions of tiny organisms working together. They moved with perfect coordination, never wasting a single motion. They brought with them what looked like organs, the kind that might be inside a body. But these organs were massive, each one the size of a small car. They had been grown and shaped over thousands of years to produce any sound in the known universe. The Thryn were very proud of them. The Zephins didn't walk into the chamber. They drifted. They were beings of pure energy, held together by technology that humans still didn't fully understand. They looked like tall figures made of colored light, constantly shifting between blue and purple and green. Their machines came in on floating platforms. The devices looked like nothing so much as huge prisms, but they could do something incredible. They could turn sound into visible light, and light into sound. Music you could see, and colors you could hear. One by one, the other species arrived. Each one brought something amazing. The Cormac brought devices that produced electromagnetic symphonies. The Ithara brought bioacoustic generators. The Drell brought quantum harmonizers. Every single delegation carried machines that represented the peak of their civilization's achievement in sound production. Then the human delegation arrived. The transport ship that brought them was small and old. It had scratches on its hull, and one of its engines made a strange rattling sound. When it docked, many of the alien delegates stopped their conversations to watch. Humanity was new to the Galactic Council. They had only made contact with alien life 30 years ago. In galactic terms, that was like yesterday. Everyone was curious what these strange beings from Earth would bring. The airlock opened and 3 humans walked out. Well, 2 adults and 1 child. Commander Lisa Grant led the way. She was a tall woman with short dark hair going gray at the temples. She wore a dark blue uniform with golden stripes on the shoulders. Behind her came Peter Hayes, a younger man with glasses and brown hair. He carried a battered tablet computer under one arm. And next to him, holding his hand, was a small girl. The girl's name was Emma Rodriguez. She looked to be about 12 years old with long black hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying recently. She wore a simple dress and carried something in her other hand. It was a wooden box with a long neck sticking out of it. Strings ran down the neck to the body of the box. Some of the alien delegates had seen pictures of human musical instruments before. This was called a guitar. But something was wrong with it. Even the aliens could see that. The guitar was old and scratched. The wood was faded in places. And most obvious of all, it only had 3 strings. There should have been 6. The council chamber, which had been full of the sounds of 47 different languages being translated, went quiet. The silence spread like a wave from where the humans entered. Delegates turned to look at each other with whatever they used for eyes. Translation devices clicked and buzzed as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Jelvar stood up from his seat. His crystalline body caught the light and threw it around the room. When he spoke, his voice was like wind chimes. The translators turned it into words everyone could understand. "Commander Grant," he said, "welcome to the Universal Music Exchange. We have been expecting your delegation." Lisa smiled and walked forward. Emma stayed close to Peter, who kept one hand on her shoulder. They made their way down to the floor of the chamber and stood before the council. "Thank you, Counselor Jelvar," Lisa said. "We're honored to be here." Jelvar's form flickered in a way that the translator said meant he was confused. "Commander, forgive my directness, but we were informed that each species would bring their most advanced sonic technology. We were expecting machines, instruments of cultural significance, devices that represent the peak of human achievement in sound production." Lisa nodded. "We did bring exactly that, Counselor." She gestured to Emma and the broken guitar. The girl looked very small standing in the huge chamber. She held the guitar close to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. "This is Emma Rodriguez," Lisa continued, "and this is a guitar. It's a musical instrument from Earth. It's one of the oldest and most important instruments in human culture." A sound rippled through the chamber. It wasn't quite laughter, but it was close. 47 different species expressing disbelief in 47 different ways. The translators worked overtime trying to capture all the nuances. A Thrin delegate stood up. His voice came out flat and emotionless, the way all Thrin spoke. "Commander Grant, that instrument appears to be damaged. We can observe that it is missing half of its strings. Surely you have not brought a broken device to represent your species at this exchange." Peter spoke up for the first time. "3 strings broke during our journey here. We decided not to replace them." Now the chamber erupted in real confusion. The sounds mixed together into a chaos of clicks, whistles, hums, and electromagnetic pulses. The translators gave up trying to capture individual voices and just provided a general sense: shock, confusion, and something close to pity. Jelvar raised one crystalline arm and the chamber fell silent again. He looked at Lisa for a long moment. His face was hard to read, being made of crystal, but his body language suggested he was trying to be patient with these strange humans who clearly didn't understand what they had signed up for. "Commander," he said slowly, "perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. This exchange is meant to showcase the pinnacle of musical achievement. Every species here has brought devices that represent centuries or even millennia of development. The Velkari resonators have been grown for 3,000 years. The Thrin organs are the result of genetic engineering spanning 5,000 years of evolution. And you have brought a broken wooden box and a child." Lisa's smile didn't waver. "Yes, Counselor, that's exactly right. But surely you understand that this puts your delegation at a significant disadvantage? The other species will be demonstrating technical perfection, mathematical purity, sounds that have been engineered to stimulate pleasure responses in any known biology. How can a damaged primitive instrument compete with that?" "Maybe it can't," Lisa admitted, "but we'd like to try anyway if you'll let us." Jelvar was quiet for a moment. Then he seemed to make a decision. His body shifted color slightly, from blue to a warmer purple. "Very well. Earth is a new member of our council. Perhaps your understanding of music is different from ours. We will give you the opportunity to present your contribution. But I must warn you, Commander, the standards here are very high. If you wish to withdraw and return with more appropriate technology, we would understand." "No need," Lisa said. "We're ready when you are." "The presentations will begin tomorrow," Jelvar said. "Each delegation will have time to demonstrate their sonic achievements. The humans will present last, after all other species have completed their demonstrations. This will give you time to observe what is expected." "That's fine with us," Lisa said. She turned and walked back toward the human section of the chamber, which was a small area near the back. Peter and Emma followed her. As they walked, Emma held the guitar even tighter. Her fingers found the 3 remaining strings and plucked them very softly. The sound was so quiet that only Peter heard it. The notes were out of tune and weak. But Emma smiled a little when she heard them. The rest of the delegates began talking again, this time about the humans. The general opinion was clear. Earth had made a mistake. They had misunderstood the assignment. That poor child with her broken instrument would be embarrassed when she saw what real music technology could do. Some delegates felt sorry for them. Others thought it was amusing. A few were already composing reports to send home about how primitive human culture still was. But in the human section, Lisa sat down between Peter and Emma and took the girl's hand. "You doing okay?" she asked quietly. Emma nodded. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Did you see all those machines? They're so big and so fancy. And this," she looked down at the guitar, "this is just Dad's old guitar with 3 strings missing." "That's not just anything," Lisa said gently. "That's your dad's guitar. That's the guitar Daniel Rodriguez played every night on the Unity. That's the guitar that carried his music across the stars. That's the guitar you learned to play so you could feel close to him. That's not nothing, Emma. That's everything." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "What if I mess up? What if I forget the words? What if they laugh at me?" Peter leaned over. "Then they laugh." "So what? You're not playing for them, Emma. Remember?" The next morning, the council chamber filled with beings from across the galaxy. The presentations were about to begin. Every seat was occupied. Some species stood. Others floated. A few existed in special containers filled with their home atmosphere. Everyone was eager to see what the other civilizations had achieved in the realm of sound. Jelvar stood at the center of the stage. His crystalline form caught the morning light streaming through the windows and scattered it across the audience. "We gather today to share the highest achievements of our cultures in the art of sonic production. Each delegation will present in the order determined by random selection. We begin with the Velkari." The lights dimmed. 4 Velkari carried the large transparent case onto the stage. Inside, the geometric resonators floated and slowly rotated. They positioned the case carefully in the exact center of the stage. Then they stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the resonators began to glow. It started as a faint blue light deep inside the crystal structure. The glow spread outward until the entire shape was luminous. And then it began to sing. Calling it singing didn't really capture what it was. The sound that came from the resonator was like nothing else in nature. It was a pure tone, mathematically perfect. Not just one note, but a note that seemed to contain all possible notes within it. The frequency was stable to 17 decimal places. It didn't waver, it didn't fluctuate, it simply was. As the first resonator sang, the others began to join in. Each one added a new layer of harmony. The harmonies were calculated using advanced mathematics that most species in the council didn't fully understand. The Velkari had spent 3,000 years growing these resonators in the crystalline caves of their homeworld. Every atom was in its perfect place. The sound filled the chamber. It touched every being present. The Velkari had designed it that way. The frequencies were chosen to stimulate pleasure centers in every known type of brain or consciousness. It didn't matter if you were carbon-based or silicon-based, if you thought with neurons or with quantum fields. The sound found whatever part of you experienced joy and activated it. Emma sat in the human section, listening with wide eyes. She had never heard anything like it. The sound was beautiful, but it was also strange. It made her feel happy, but in a way that felt artificial, like someone had reached into her head and pressed a button labeled happiness. The performance lasted exactly 18 minutes. The Velkari had calculated that this was the optimal duration for maximum impact without causing fatigue. When the last tone faded, the chamber was absolutely silent for 5 seconds. Then the acknowledgement began. Each species had their own way of showing respect for technical excellence. The Velkari had demonstrated it perfectly. Jelvar returned to the stage. The Council acknowledges the Velkari contribution. Technical analysis will be conducted and scores will be compiled. We now move to the Thrin presentation. The Thrin delegation brought their massive bioacoustic organs onto the stage. It took 12 of them to carry the organs, moving in perfect coordination. The organs were placed on special platforms that connected them to power sources and control systems. The Thrin had eliminated emotion from their culture 12,000 years ago. They considered feelings to be inefficient. But they understood that other species valued music, so they had spent 5,000 years engineering these organs to produce technically perfect sound. The organs began to pulse. They were living things, grown from modified genetic material. They breathed and circulated fluids through their structures. And they produced sound. The range was incredible. The organs could produce any frequency from the deepest bass to the highest treble. They could create sounds that humans couldn't even hear, reaching down into infrasound and up into ultrasound. For the species in the chamber who could perceive those ranges, it was a full-spectrum experience. The Thrin had programmed a composition that demonstrated every possible capability of the organs. It started with a single pure tone in the middle range. Then it split into harmonies. Then the harmonies divided and divided again until hundreds of distinct tones filled the air, each one perfectly stable, each one mathematically related to all the others. The performance was impressive in its complexity. The organs never made a mistake. Every tone was exactly where it should be. The Thrin conductor stood motionless, sending control signals through a neural interface. His gray face showed no expression. This was not art as humans understood it. This was technical demonstration raised to its highest form. Peter leaned over to Lisa and whispered, "It's like listening to a computer sing." "That's basically what it is," Lisa whispered back. "They've optimized everything. No room for mistakes, no room for anything unpredictable." Emma just listened. She found it interesting, but cold. The sounds were amazing, but they didn't make her feel anything except impressed. It was like watching someone solve a very complicated math problem very quickly. You could admire the skill without being moved by it. The Thrin performance lasted 22 minutes. When it ended, the acknowledgement was respectful. Technical perfection deserved technical recognition. The presentations continued throughout the day. The Zephins came next with their light sound converters. They created a performance where every sound had a corresponding color. Deep bass became rich red. High notes became bright violet. Harmonies created patterns in the air that looked like geometric flowers blooming and folding back on themselves. It was beautiful to watch. The whole chamber became a three-dimensional painting made of sound and light. The Zephins had spent centuries developing the technology. The conversion between sound and light was perfect. Every wavelength of light corresponded exactly to its acoustic equivalent. Emma found herself more engaged with this performance. At least it was pretty. But something still felt missing. It was like watching fireworks. Beautiful, but distant. Something that happened outside of you rather than inside you. The Cormac presented their electromagnetic symphonies. Most species couldn't directly perceive these, so the Council provided translation devices that converted the electromagnetic pulses into audible sound. The Cormac composition was based on the magnetic fields of their homeworld's 3 moons. They had taken measurements over a century and converted the data into music. The result was alien and strange. It sounded like wind chimes if wind chimes were made of lightning. It was interesting, but hard to follow. The patterns didn't match anything that human ears were used to. Emma tried to appreciate it, but she kept losing track of what was happening. On and on the presentations went. The Yathara brought devices that could reproduce any sound in nature. They demonstrated by creating the sound of rain, thunder, bird songs, and whale calls from a dozen different worlds. Every sound was perfect. If you closed your eyes, you would swear you were actually standing in a thunderstorm or floating in an alien ocean. The Drell brought quantum harmonizers that could produce 2 different notes in the same space at the same time by using quantum superposition. The sound existed in multiple states until you listened to it, at which point it collapsed into one version or another. Different species in the chamber heard different performances, all equally valid, all happening simultaneously. Every presentation was impressive. Every demonstration showed incredible technology. Devices that had taken centuries or millennia to develop. Machines that could do things that seemed impossible. Perfect sound, perfect harmony, perfect execution. But as the day wore on, Emma noticed something. The performances were starting to blur together in her mind. They were all amazing, but they were all amazing in similar ways. Perfect machines producing perfect sounds. Technical demonstrations that impressed the mind without touching the heart. She looked down at her father's guitar. The old wood was warm under her fingers. She could see the scratches where his pick had worn away the finish over years of playing. She could see the dent near the bridge where he had accidentally dropped it once and then laughed about it. She could see the spot where her own tears had fallen onto it when she learned he wasn't coming home. This guitar wasn't perfect. It was old and beaten up, and it was missing half its strings. But it was real. Her father's hands had touched these strings. His music had come out of this wood. And now her music would come out of it too. Not perfect music. Not technically impressive music, but real music. Her music. Peter noticed her looking at the guitar. "You okay?" he whispered. "Yeah," Emma whispered back. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how Dad used to say that music wasn't about the instrument. It was about what you put into it." Peter smiled. "Your dad was a smart man." The last of the alien delegations finished their presentations as the station's artificial sunset began to paint the windows orange and gold. Jelvar returned to the stage one final time. "We have now witnessed 46 demonstrations of sonic excellence," he announced. "Each one has shown remarkable achievement. The Technical Analysis Committee will spend this evening compiling measurements and scores. Tomorrow, we will hear the final presentation." He paused and looked toward the human section. "Commander Grant, will your delegation be ready?" Lisa stood up. "We will, Counselor." "Very well. The human presentation will take place tomorrow at mid-cycle. We look forward to seeing what Earth has contributed to this exchange." The tone in his voice was kind, but Emma could hear the doubt underneath it. He was being polite. He didn't expect much from the humans with their broken guitar. No one did. As the chamber began to empty, delegates from various species passed by the human section. Some looked at Emma with curiosity, others with pity. A few younger aliens stopped to look at the guitar. They had never seen anything quite like it. So simple, so primitive. Wood and metal strings. No power source, no quantum processors, no genetic engineering, just a box that made sound when you plucked the strings. One young Velkari, barely more than a child herself, reached out toward the guitar. "May I touch it?" she asked through her translator. Emma smiled and held it out. "Sure, be careful though. The strings are kind of sharp." The young Valkyrie ran one crystalline finger along the neck of the guitar. "It's so simple," she said, wonder in her voice, "but also complex. The wood has patterns in it. Every line is different." "That's called grain," Emma explained. "It's from when the tree was growing. Each tree is different." "Your instrument was alive?" "A long time ago, yeah, before it became a guitar." The young Velkari seemed amazed by this. "Our resonators are grown, but they were never alive in the way you mean. They are crystals. They have never had life force within them." She looked at Emma carefully. "What will you play tomorrow?" "A song my dad taught me," Emma said. "It's not fancy. It's just a song about stars and home and missing people you love." "That sounds beautiful. It's not perfect, though. I mess up sometimes. And with only 3 strings, I can't play all the right chords." The young Velkari tilted her head in confusion. "But if you know you will make mistakes, why not wait until you can fix the instrument?" Emma thought about that. "Because the mistakes are part of it, I guess. My dad used to say that music is about the journey, not the destination. If I waited until everything was perfect, I'd never play at all." The young Velkari's parent called to her and she had to go. But she looked back at Emma one more time before she left. "I hope your song tomorrow touches the part of me that the resonators cannot reach," she said. When the chamber was finally empty, except for the morning of Emma's performance arrived too quickly, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the massive council chamber filled with alien beings watching her, waiting for her to fail, or worse, waiting for her to finish so they could politely acknowledge her attempt before moving on to announce the real winners. Lisa knocked on her door early. "Time to get ready, Emma." Emma was already dressed. She had been sitting on her bed for an hour, holding the guitar, running her fingers over the 3 remaining strings. They were still slightly out of tune. She could have tuned them. She knew how, but something made her leave them as they were. "I've been thinking," Emma said as Lisa came in. "Maybe this is a bad idea. Maybe we should just tell them we're withdrawing." "I don't want to embarrass Earth." Lisa sat down next to her. "You won't embarrass anyone. You're going to get up there and play your dad's song, and whatever happens after that is what happens." "But what if I forget the words? What if my voice cracks? What if they laugh?" "Then they laugh," Lisa said gently. "Emma, do you remember what your dad used to say about mistakes?" Emma nodded. "He said mistakes are just proof that you're trying something real." "That's right. Every one of those alien species brought machines that can't make mistakes. But machines also can't take risks. They can't be brave. They can't stand up in front of everyone and share something that comes from their heart. You can do all of those things. That's not a weakness. That's your strength." Peter appeared in the doorway. "It's time," he said softly. The walk to the council chamber felt both too long and too short. Emma's legs felt shaky. Her hands were sweating. The guitar strap dug into her shoulder. She kept having to remind herself to breathe. The chamber was completely full. Every delegation had returned to see the final presentation, the one that everyone was curious about. The humans and their broken instrument. As Emma entered, she could feel thousands of eyes, sensors, and perception fields focusing on her. The stage seemed impossibly far away, and impossibly big. Emma had played in front of people before. She had played at her school talent show. She had played at her father's memorial service. But this was different. These weren't just people. These were representatives of civilizations that had mastered space travel, quantum physics, and genetic engineering. And she was about to play them a simple song on 3 strings. Gelvar stood at his place in the council. His crystalline form caught the light. "Commander Grant, is your delegation prepared to present?" Lisa nodded. "We are, Counselor." "Then please proceed." Lisa walked Emma to the center of the stage. The enormous chamber seemed to swallow them both. Lisa squeezed Emma's hand once, then stepped back. Emma was alone in the spotlight. She adjusted the guitar strap. Her fingers found the strings. They felt familiar under her touch. These were the same strings her father had played. Well, 3 of them anyway. The other 3 were gone, like her father was gone. But the remaining strings were still here, and she was still here, and that had to be enough. Before she began to play, Lisa stepped forward again. She had asked for permission to speak first, and Gelvar had granted it. "Honorable delegates," Lisa said, her voice clear and steady. "Before Emma plays, I want to tell you about this guitar. It belonged to Lieutenant Daniel Rodriguez. He served on our exploration vessel Unity. 3 years ago, the Unity encountered what we call a void storm near the Kepler Nebula. It's a phenomenon we still don't fully understand. A storm in space itself." The chamber was completely silent. Everyone was listening. "The Unity was caught in the storm," Lisa continued. "The ship was lost. All hands were lost, including Daniel Rodriguez. He was a good officer, a good friend, and a good father. Every night on that ship, Daniel would play this guitar for the crew. He said it reminded them why they were out there in the dark. Why they had left their homes and families. Why they traveled between the stars." Lisa looked at Emma. The girl's eyes were already wet with tears. "This guitar crossed light years of space," Lisa said. "It survived the storms and the void and the cold. It carried Daniel's music and his memory. After he died, his daughter Emma taught herself to play on it. She taught herself the songs he used to play. This guitar is not perfect. It's old. It's scratched. 3 of its strings broke on our journey here. But this guitar has something that none of your perfect machines have. It has memory. It has love. It has loss. And today, Emma is going to share that with you." Lisa stepped back again. The stage was Emma's. Emma closed her eyes. She thought about her father. She could almost see him. The way he used to sit on the edge of her bed and play. The way his fingers moved across the strings. The way he would close his eyes when he sang, like the music was taking him somewhere far away. She began to play. The first notes came out thin and wavering. The strings were out of tune, just slightly, enough that anyone with a good ear could hear it. With only 3 strings, she couldn't make the full chords. She could only approximate them. Hit a few notes and let the listener's mind fill in the rest. The sound was objectively terrible. The council's instruments were already measuring it. Frequency instability, harmonic incompleteness, execution errors. By every standard they had established over thousands of years, this was poor quality sound production. But then Emma began to sing. Her voice was small at first. A young girl's voice, barely carrying across the huge chamber. She sang about stars, about her father showing her constellations when she was little, about him promising to take her to see those stars up close someday, about watching his ship leave, smaller and smaller, until it was just another star in the sky. And then about the day that star went out. The song was simple, just a few verses and a chorus that repeated. The melody was basic, nothing complex or technically impressive. Emma's voice cracked on some of the higher notes. She had to pause once to catch her breath, and on the second verse, her voice nearly broke completely when she sang about the last time she saw her father. But something was happening in the chamber. The Velkari delegation sat motionless. Gelvar's crystalline form had stopped its usual subtle movements. He was completely still, which never happened. Velkari bodies were always in motion, always adjusting to maintain their structure. But now, Gelvar stood frozen, and colors were moving through his form that his species usually kept hidden. Blues and purples and deep reds that indicated emotional disruption. The Thrin delegates were making sounds. Quiet sounds, almost below hearing. Their bioacoustic organs were activating involuntarily, producing frequencies they hadn't intended. And something even stranger was happening. Moisture was appearing on their gray skin. Drops of liquid were forming and running down their faces. The Thrin had eliminated tears from their biology 12,000 years ago. They had considered them inefficient. But here they were, crying without knowing how. The Zephin's light forms were flickering. They prided themselves on absolute control over their photonic structure. But now they were pulsing with colors that indicated confusion and distress. Their forms dimmed and brightened in patterns that matched Emma's song. They were resonating with her, unable to maintain their usual control. Emma didn't see any of this. Her eyes were closed. She was somewhere else. She was back on Earth, in her room, learning this song from the old recordings her father had made. She was at his memorial service, playing these same notes while uniformed officers stood at attention. She was alone in the dark, playing for herself, for him, for the empty space where he used to be. The guitar's imperfect sound filled the chamber. The out-of-tune strings created harmonics that shouldn't have existed. The missing strings left gaps in the music, silences where notes should have been. Emma's voice wavered and cracked. She missed a chord change. Her timing wasn't perfect. She struggled to reach one of the high notes, but none of that mattered. Because what was happening in that chamber wasn't about perfect sound, it was about something else entirely. Emma wasn't demonstrating technical achievement. She wasn't showing off advanced technology. She was sharing her grief, her love, her loss. And somehow, impossibly, beings from 47 different worlds were understanding it. A Cormac delegate, whose species communicated through electromagnetic pulses, suddenly broadcasted on all frequencies at once. The translation came through confused and distressed. What is happening to me? Why are my systems malfunctioning? Why do I feel this pain that is not my pain? No one answered him. Everyone was too busy experiencing the same thing. The song was reaching past their thinking minds, past their logic and their technology and their thousands of years of cultural development. It was finding something deeper, something they had forgotten existed, or maybe something they had deliberately removed because it was inefficient or illogical or messy. Emma reached the final chorus. Her voice was barely a whisper now. The tears were running down her face openly. She sang about how the stars her father showed her were still there, how they still shined even though he was gone, how she could look up at night and remember him, how the music continued even after the musician had left. The last notes faded away. The guitar's 3 strings hummed briefly and then fell silent. Emma opened her eyes and looked out at the assembled council. Only then did she see what was happening. Every being in that chamber had been affected. The Velkari were showing colors that indicated profound emotional disruption. The Thrin were crying. The Zephans were flickering like candles in wind. The young Ythra delegate who had spoken yesterday was making a sound like sobbing, though her species wasn't supposed to have that reflex anymore. Even the energy beings in their containment fields were pulsing in patterns that looked like distress. Emma stood there, small and alone on the huge stage, tears streaming down her face, holding her father's guitar with its 3 remaining strings. She didn't understand what she had done. She had just played a song. A simple song about missing someone she loved. That was all. The silence that followed was complete. No one moved. No one spoke. The measurement instruments were still recording, still analyzing, still calculating. But no one was paying attention to them anymore. Then, Gelvar did something unprecedented in Galactic Council history. He stepped down from his position and walked toward the stage. His crystalline form moved slowly. The silence in the council chamber broke apart into confusion. Delegates were trying to understand what had just happened to them, trying to process feelings that many of their species had spent thousands of years trying to eliminate or control or perfect away. The Thrin delegation was in chaos. They were still crying, and they didn't know how to stop. Their genetic modifications had removed the tear reflex 12,000 years ago. But here it was, back again, triggered by something as simple as a child's song. One of the older Thrin stood up, moisture streaming down his gray face, his voice shaking as he spoke. "This is impossible. Our biology does not permit this response. We eliminated these inefficiencies from our genome. How did this small human bypass millennia of careful engineering with nothing but imperfect sounds?" A Zephan representative tried to speak but couldn't maintain her form long enough. She kept flickering, her photonic structure destabilizing. Finally, she managed to hold together long enough to broadcast through the translator. "We are energy beings. We have complete control over our electromagnetic signatures. Nothing should be able to disrupt us without our permission. But I cannot stop this flickering. I cannot maintain my composure." "What is this power you have shown us, young human?" Emma stood on the stage, confused and frightened by the reactions around her. She looked back at Lisa and Peter. "Did I do something wrong? I don't understand." Lisa climbed up onto the stage and put her arms around Emma. "No, sweetie, you didn't do anything wrong. You did something very, very right. But I'm not sure anyone here knows how to handle it." Peter joined them. He looked out at the assembly of alien beings, all of them experiencing emotional reactions they hadn't felt in centuries or longer. "Commander, I think we need to explain what just happened. They're confused. Some of them look scared." Lisa nodded. She kept one arm around Emma and turned to face the council. "May I speak, Counselor Gelvar?" Gelvar had returned to his position, but he looked different. His crystalline structure was still showing colors that indicated deep emotion. He seemed to be struggling to maintain his official composure. "Please, Commander Grant, we require an explanation. What has your child done to this assembly?" "She played a song," Lisa said simply. "That's all. A song her father taught her." "But the effects?" a Cormac delegate interjected. "The emotional disruption is beyond anything we have measured. Every species in this chamber has been affected. My own electromagnetic patterns are unstable. I am experiencing sensations I have no framework to process. This cannot be merely from imperfect sound waves." Peter stepped forward. "That's where you're wrong. It's not despite the imperfections. It's because of them." The chamber fell quiet. Everyone was listening now, trying to understand. "You measured Emma's performance," Peter continued. "Your instruments told you that the frequency stability was poor. The harmonics were incomplete. The execution had errors. By every technical standard you've developed, Emma's performance scored low. maybe the lowest ever recorded in this exchange. Then why, Gelvar asked slowly, do I feel like I have experienced something more profound than any of the perfect performances that came before it? Because Emma wasn't sharing sound, Lisa said. She was sharing herself, her grief, her love for her father, her pain at losing him. And all those imperfections you measured, they weren't errors. They were evidence that something real was happening. A young Ythra delegate named Pelkin stood up. Her voice was shaking. I do not understand. How can imperfection be better than perfection? We have spent our entire civilization pursuing excellence, removing errors, optimizing outcomes. How can you tell us that we have been wrong? You haven't been wrong, Lisa said gently. You've just been measuring the wrong thing. You optimized for technical perfection, and you achieved it. Every machine that performed over the last 2 days was technically perfect. But technical perfection isn't what music is for. Then what is it for? Gelvar asked. It was a genuine question. He truly didn't know anymore. Emma found her voice. It was small and uncertain, but it carried across the chamber. My dad used to say that music is how we talk when words aren't enough. It's how we share things that are too big or too complicated to explain, like how much you love someone, or how much it hurts when they're gone. She looked down at the guitar in her hands. When I play this, I'm not trying to make perfect sounds. I'm trying to tell you about my dad, about how he would play this same guitar every night, about how his hands touch these same strings, about how he's gone now, and these strings are broken, but I still play because it makes me feel close to him. Tears were rolling down her face again, but she kept talking. The strings are out of tune because the guitar is old. The sound is wrong because I'm missing half the strings. My voice cracks because I'm sad. But all of that is part of the message. If everything was perfect, it would just be sounds. The imperfections are what make it real. The chamber was completely silent. Emma's words hung in the air like a challenge to everything these civilizations had built. A Thrin elder stood up slowly. His face was still wet with tears he shouldn't be able to produce. For 12,000 years, my people have pursued logic and efficiency. We removed emotion because we believed it made us weak, made us inefficient. We built the perfect organs you heard yesterday. They can produce any sound, make any frequency. But they cannot make anyone cry, not like this. He looked at Emma with something in his eyes that might have been regret. We have spent millennia building machines to replace what we had naturally. And in doing so, we have forgotten why we made music in the first place. It was not to demonstrate technical achievement. It was to connect with each other. To share the experiences that make us who we are. Gelvar's form shimmered with colors that his species rarely showed in public. Deep purples and blues that indicated vulnerability. The Velkari have a similar history. We grew our resonators for 3,000 years. We calculated perfect harmonies. We engineered sounds that could stimulate pleasure in any biology. But we lost something in the process. He looked at Emma. Your performance was technically the worst we have heard, but it was the only one that made us feel something we did not expect to feel. The only one that surprised us. The only one that reminded us of what it means to be alive rather than simply functional. Pelkin spoke again. So the imperfection was necessary? The out-of-tune strings, the cracking voice, the missed notes? These were not failures? They were proof, Lisa said. Proof that Emma was really there, really playing, really feeling. A perfect machine could have played those 3 strings. It could have played them better than Emma did. But it wouldn't have been the same. Because it wouldn't have been that child, in that moment, missing her father and sharing that loss with you. Peter added, there's an old saying on Earth. The song isn't in the notes. It's in the silence between the notes. And what fills that silence is the person playing. Their joy, their pain, their humanity. That's what you heard today. Not perfect sound. Perfect honesty. A Zephin who had finally stabilized her form spoke up. But how do we measure this? How do we quantify emotional impact? How do we score honesty? Our entire evaluation system is based on technical metrics. Maybe that's the problem, Lisa said. Maybe some things aren't meant to be measured. Maybe some things are just meant to be experienced. The council erupted into discussion. Every species was talking at once. Some were arguing that technical standards must be maintained. Others were questioning whether those standards had ever been appropriate. Some were confused and frightened by what they had felt. Others were excited, like they had discovered something they didn't know was missing. Jelvar called for order. It took several minutes for the chamber to quiet down. When it finally did, he looked at the evaluation committee. They were a group of specialists from different species, responsible for analyzing the performances and determining scores. "What do your instruments say about the human performance?" Jelvar asked. The committee head, a being whose species communicated through color changes, displayed a pattern that the translators read as deeply uncertain. "The technical scores are the lowest we have recorded. Frequency stability was poor. Harmonic content was incomplete. Execution showed multiple errors. By our established metrics, this performance fails to meet minimum standards." "And yet," Jelvar prompted. "And yet," the committee head continued, "we all felt what we felt. Every species in this chamber experienced profound emotional responses. Our instruments can measure sound waves. They cannot measure how those waves make us feel, or why. We have no metric for measuring the impact of a child's grief. We have no scale for quantifying shared pain. We have no formula for calculating the value of genuine emotion." The Cormac delegate who had spoken earlier stood up. "Then perhaps we have been using the wrong instruments. We have measured everything except what matters." "What do you propose?" Jelvar asked. "I propose that we acknowledge what happened here today. A child with a broken instrument taught 47 advanced civilizations, something we had forgotten. Or perhaps something we never knew. That perfection without meaning is empty. That technical achievement without emotional truth is just noise. That the cracks are where the light gets in." He turned to look at Emma. "I vote that the humans win this exchange, not because they demonstrated technical superiority, but because they reminded us why we make music at all." The chamber erupted again. Some delegates agreed immediately, others protested. The debate went on for hours. Emma was allowed to leave the stage. She sat with Lisa and Peter in the human section, exhausted and overwhelmed. She had just wanted to play her father's song. She never expected any of this. Finally, after the longest debate in council history, Jelvar called for a formal decision. The vote was split at first. Many species felt that changing the standards would invalidate everything they had achieved. But gradually, minds began to change. Species that had spent thousands of years pursuing perfection began to question whether they had been pursuing the right goal. In the end, the council made an unprecedented decision. They created two categories. Technical achievement would continue to exist, with all its rigorous standards and measurements. The Velkari won this category easily. Their resonators represented the peak of sonic engineering. But they created a new category. They called it living expression. And this category couldn't be measured by instruments. It could only be judged by how it made you feel. By whether it reached past your thinking mind and touched something deeper. By whether it reminded you that you were alive. Emma Rodriguez won this category unanimously. Every single species voted for her. Even the ones who had argued against creating the category in the first place couldn't deny what they had felt during her performance. When the results were announced, Emma didn't know how to react. She had come here expecting to embarrass herself. Instead, she had taught the galaxy something it had forgotten. She had shown them that being imperfect wasn't a weakness. It was what made them real. That night, the council held a celebration. But it was different from the formal ceremonies they usually held. Species that hadn't shown emotion in millennia were laughing and crying and sharing stories. The young Valkyrie who had spoken to Emma before came to find her. The weeks following the Universal Music Exchange were unlike anything the Galactic Council had experienced in its 10,000-year history. What had started as a simple competition about sound had turned into something much bigger. It had become a question about the very nature of art, meaning, and what it meant to be alive. The Council's evaluation committee met every day for a month. They were trying to create formal criteria for the new living expression category. But every time they tried to define it, they ran into the same problem. How do you measure something that is meant to be felt rather than analyzed? Pelkin, the young Ythra researcher, led much of this work. She had been changed by Emma's performance more than most. She stood before the committee one afternoon, frustrated but determined. "We keep trying to create rules for something that exists beyond rules," she said. "We want to quantify emotional impact, calculate the value of genuine feeling, create standards for authenticity. But the moment we do that, we destroy the very thing we're trying to preserve." The committee head looked at her with confusion. "Then how do we judge future performances in this category? How do we ensure fairness?" "Maybe fairness is the wrong goal," Pelkin said quietly. "Maybe some things aren't meant to be fair. They're just meant to be true." The debate continued. But while the council argued about standards and criteria, something else was happening across the galaxy. Emma's performance had been recorded and shared. At first, the council tried to keep it private, but someone leaked the recording. Within weeks, beings from thousands of worlds had seen it. The response was overwhelming. Species that had spent millennia optimizing emotions out of their cultures found themselves crying over a human child song. Civilizations that prided themselves on logic and efficiency discovered that they had been missing something essential. The recording of Emma playing her three-stringed guitar became the most widely shared piece of media in galactic history. On the Velkari homeworld, something unprecedented happened. Young Velkari started asking questions their elders couldn't answer. Why had they eliminated emotion from their society? What had they gained by pursuing perfect crystal clarity in all things? And more importantly, what had they lost? A movement began. Young Velkari started purposely introducing imperfections into their art. They would grow resonators that weren't perfectly symmetrical. They would create compositions with deliberate flaws. Their elders were horrified at first. This violated 3,000 years of tradition. But then the elders listened to what the young ones were creating, and they felt something they hadn't felt in centuries. Surprise. Wonder. The joy of experiencing something unexpected. The perfect resonators had been beautiful, but predictable. You always knew what they would sound like. But these new imperfect instruments could surprise you. Make you feel things you didn't expect to feel. Jelvar himself became an advocate for this new movement. He shocked his people by appearing at a public forum with his crystalline structure intentionally clouded with inclusions. These were imperfections he would normally have corrected immediately, but he left them visible. "I have spent 300 years maintaining perfect clarity," he told the assembled Velkari. "I have eliminated every flaw, corrected every asymmetry, removed every irregular growth. I have achieved what our society defines as ideal form, and in doing so, I have become indistinguishable from every other elder. We are all perfectly clear, and perfectly boring." The crowd stirred. This was shocking language from a council leader. "A human child with a broken instrument taught me something our entire civilization had forgotten," Jelvar continued. "She taught me that the cracks are where the light gets in. That imperfection is not something to be eliminated, but something to be embraced. Because it is what makes us individuals rather than identical copies of an ideal." The Thrin experienced an even more dramatic transformation. The elders called an emergency genetic council. They had a decision to make. For 12,000 years, they had been removing emotion from their genome. They had believed it made them stronger, more efficient, more logical. But Emma's song had triggered responses they thought they had eliminated. Responses that felt not like weakness, but like coming home. The debate among the Thrin was fierce. Some argued that they couldn't undo 12,000 years of genetic engineering without consequences. Others argued that keeping emotions suppressed now that they knew what they were missing would be cruel. In the end, they made emotion optional. They released a counter-modification that would restore the emotional responses they had removed. Each Thrin could choose for themselves whether to activate it. The elders expected only the young ones to choose emotion. They were wrong. Within a year, nearly 80% of the Thrin population had chosen to restore their feelings. There were consequences. Thrin society became messier, less efficient, more chaotic. But it also became more creative, more vibrant, more alive. They started making new kinds of music. Not the perfect technical demonstrations they had created before, but songs that meant something. Songs about their history, their losses, their hopes for the future. One elderly Thrin, who had lived for 3,000 years without emotion, activated the counter modification and then listened to Emma's recording for the first time with feelings restored. He cried for 3 days straight. When asked why, he said, "I am mourning for all the years I spent not being able to mourn. I am feeling all the losses I never let myself feel. It hurts. It hurts so much. And it is the most alive I have ever felt." The changes rippled out across the galaxy. The Zephans started experimenting with letting their light forms flicker and pulse naturally instead of maintaining rigid control. The Cormac began incorporating random variations into their electromagnetic symphonies. The Ythera stopped engineering every aspect of their bioacoustic generators and let some organic randomness back in. But not everyone was happy about these changes. Some species resisted. They argued that the pursuit of perfection was what had allowed them to advance as civilizations, that removing standards would lead to chaos, that a single emotional performance by one human child shouldn't overturn thousands of years of cultural development. A group of conservative delegates called for another council meeting. They wanted to reverse the decision to create the living expression category. They wanted to return to pure technical standards. They invited Emma and the human delegation back to Harmony Prime to debate the issue. Lisa, Peter, and Emma returned 6 months after the original exchange. Emma had changed in that time. She was still quiet and shy, but there was a confidence in her now that hadn't been there before. She had continued playing her father's guitar. She had even written some new songs. Still with just 3 strings. She had decided to never restring it fully. The missing strings were part of who the instrument was now. The debate took place in the same council chamber where Emma had first performed. The conservative delegates made their case. They brought data showing decreased efficiency in societies that had embraced imperfection. They showed examples of what they considered inferior art being celebrated just because it was emotional. They argued that standards existed for a reason. Then they turned to Emma. "You are young," their spokesperson said, not unkindly. "You do not understand what you have done. You have disrupted civilizations that have stood for thousands of years. You have convinced beings to abandon the pursuit of excellence in favor of messy, unpredictable emotion. Can you justify this disruption?" Emma stood up. She had the guitar with her, as always. She walked to the center of the chamber, to the same spot where she had played before. "I didn't mean to disrupt anything," she said quietly. "I just played my dad's song. But I think maybe you've been asking the wrong question. You keep asking if we should pursue perfection or embrace imperfection. But that's not really the choice." She held up the guitar. "This guitar is imperfect. The wood is old. The strings are out of tune. 3 strings are missing. If you measure it against a brand new, perfectly maintained guitar, this one loses every time. But this is the guitar my dad played. His hands touched these strings. His music came from this wood. And because of that, this guitar means something to me that a perfect new guitar never could." Emma looked around at all the delegates. "You can pursue perfection. There's nothing wrong with that. Your machines are amazing. They can do things this guitar could never do. But they can't be what this guitar is. They can't carry memory and love and loss. They can't be imperfect in ways that matter." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My dad used to say that music is about connection, about reaching out across the darkness and letting someone know they're not alone. Your perfect machines can transmit perfect signals. But signals aren't the same as connection. Connection requires vulnerability. It requires showing your imperfections. It requires being real." A conservative Velkari delegate stood up. "But surely there must be standards. Surely we cannot simply accept anything as art just because it is emotional?" "I'm not saying there shouldn't be standards," Emma replied. "I'm saying maybe we need different standards for different kinds of music. If you want to demonstrate technical achievement, then measure technical things. But if you want to create living expression, then you have to accept that it can't be measured the same way. You have to be willing to feel something instead of calculating it." Peter spoke up. "On Earth we have both. We have technical musicians who can play incredibly complex pieces with perfect precision. And we have street musicians who play simple songs with heart and soul. Both are valuable. Both are necessary. Why can't the galaxy have both too? Gelvar, who had been quiet throughout the debate, finally spoke. Because for too long, we have believed that perfection was the only goal worth pursuing. We have built our civilizations on the idea that flaws should be eliminated. That emotion is inefficient. That vulnerability is weakness. The humans and their broken guitar have challenged these assumptions, and we are afraid of what it means if they are right. He looked at the conservative delegates. You bring data showing decreased efficiency, but efficiency toward what end? We have created perfect machines, perfect societies, perfect art. And in doing so, we have created perfect emptiness. We can produce any sound, but we have forgotten why we wanted to produce sound in the first place. The debate continued for hours. But gradually, a consensus began to form. The galaxy was big enough for both approaches. Technical achievement and living expression could coexist. Some species would focus on one, some on the other, some on both. The important thing was recognizing that they measured different things and served different purposes. The conservative delegates weren't entirely happy with this compromise, but they accepted it. The changes that Emma had sparked were already too widespread to reverse. All across the galaxy, beings were rediscovering emotion, embracing imperfection, creating art that meant something rather than art that measured well. Before the humans left Harmony Prime, the Council made one more decision. They wanted to preserve Emma's guitar as a symbol of what had happened. They wanted to put it in the Galactic Archive of Cultural Heritage, where the most important artifacts from across the galaxy were kept. Emma hesitated. But it's my dad's guitar. It's all I have left of him. We understand, Gelvar said gently. But perhaps that is exactly why it belongs in the archive. It is not just an instrument. It is a connection to someone you loved. It is a symbol of loss and memory and continuing to create beauty even when part of you is missing. That is a lesson every being in the galaxy needs to learn. Emma thought about it for a long time. Finally, she agreed. But she made one request. She wanted to play one more song on it before it went into the archive. The council agreed immediately. So one last time, Emma stood in the center of the council chamber. One last time, she adjusted the old guitar's strap across her shoulder. One last time, her fingers found the 3 remaining strings. And one last time, she played her father's song about stars, and home, and missing people you love. 10 years passed after Emma Rodriguez played her father's guitar for the Galactic Council. 10 years that changed the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. Emma herself had grown up. She was 22 now, no longer the small, grieving child who had stood on that stage. She had become a musician, as perhaps her father always hoped she would. But not the kind of musician anyone expected. She didn't play perfect compositions in concert halls. She traveled to different worlds, teaching others about the power of imperfect expression. Humanity's position in the galaxy had changed too. They were no longer seen as the primitive newcomers. Other species had come to understand that humans had something valuable to offer, something that had nothing to do with advanced technology. Humans remembered how to be imperfect, how to be vulnerable, how to turn pain into art and art into connection. The Universal Music Exchange had become an annual event, just as it was before. But it was completely different now. Species no longer came with just their perfect machines. They sent musicians, artists, beings who had something to say rather than something to demonstrate. The competitions in both categories, technical achievement and living expression, drew huge audiences. Lisa Grant had retired from active service and now worked as Earth's cultural ambassador. Peter Hayes had written a book about the experience that had become required reading in galactic schools. And Emma's original performance, recorded all those years ago, was studied in universities across 47 worlds. But perhaps the most interesting changes happened in the individual species themselves. The Velkari, who had spent 3,000 years pursuing crystalline perfection, had split into 2 philosophical groups. The traditionalists continued to grow perfect resonators and maintain absolute clarity in their forms. But a new group, who called themselves the Fractured, deliberately introduced imperfections into their crystalline structures. They let cracks form and inclusions grow. They created art that was beautiful precisely because it was flawed. Jelvar had joined the Fractured, a decision that shocked many of his people. He was often seen now with visible fractures running through his crystalline body, and he made no effort to heal them. When asked why, he said, "These cracks tell my story. This one formed when I first heard Emma's song. This one appeared when I made the decision to change. This one grew when I finally allowed myself to mourn for all the years I spent not feeling. They are imperfections, yes, but they are my imperfections, and that makes them perfect for me." The Thrin transformation was even more dramatic. With emotions restored, their entire society had reorganized itself. They were no longer the cold, logical beings they had been for 12,000 years. They laughed, cried, argued, celebrated. Their cities, which had been efficient but sterile, became chaotic and vibrant. They started creating new forms of art, new types of music, new ways of expressing what they felt. One of the most popular Thrin musicians was an elder named Kelmoth. He was 3,000 years old and had lived most of his life without emotion. After activating the counter modification, he began composing songs about what it was like to feel for the first time. His music was simple and raw and heartbreaking. He sold more recordings than any Thrin artist in history. In an interview, Kelmoth said, "For 3,000 years, I believed I was alive, but I was only functional. There is a difference. Emma Rodriguez taught me that difference. She showed me that being alive means being vulnerable, being imperfect, being willing to hurt. I cannot thank her enough for giving me back the 50 years I have left." The Zephans had undergone their own transformation. As energy beings, they had always prided themselves on perfect control of their photonic forms. But younger Zephans started experimenting with letting themselves flicker and pulse naturally. They called it living light, and it became a whole new art form. Instead of carefully maintained humanoid shapes, these young Zephans would shift and flow, their forms responding to their emotions in real time. A Zephan artist named Lyra Esh created a performance piece where she simply stood in the center of a dark room and let her emotions play across her light form. Grief showed as deep purples. Joy burst out in bright yellows. Anger flared red. Love glowed soft pink. The audience could see exactly what she was feeling, no translation needed. It was raw and honest and beautiful. And it could never have happened before Emma's performance gave them permission to be imperfect. The younger generation across the galaxy had especially embraced these changes. They had grown up in societies that valued perfection, but they had seen Emma's recording. They had felt what it stirred in them, and they wanted more of that feeling. They wanted to create art that mattered, not just art that scored well. A whole new school of thought emerged, called effective realism. Young artists and musicians and poets from dozens of worlds began creating work that prioritized emotional truth over technical perfection. They deliberately introduced mistakes, flaws, imperfections. Not randomly, but meaningfully. Each flaw told a story. Each imperfection carried meaning. The movement had its critics, of course. Traditionalists argued that it was just an excuse for sloppy work, that anyone could claim their mistakes were intentional, that standards were being abandoned in favor of feelings. The debate raged across the galaxy, but the movement continued to grow. Because what the young artists understood, and what their elders were slowly learning, was that the imperfections weren't the point. The point was the honesty, the willingness to be vulnerable, the courage to share something real instead of something safe. Emma watched all of this from Earth. She gave lectures occasionally when invited. She performed sometimes, though never with a fully strung guitar. She had other guitars now, but she never replaced those 3 strings. That guitar sat in the Galactic Archive, a permanent reminder of what happened when one human child chose honesty over perfection. But Emma had a new guitar that she played regularly. It was newer, stronger, and she kept all 6 strings on it. But she tuned it slightly wrong on purpose. Just a little bit off. Just enough that you could hear the imperfection if you listened closely. "It keeps me honest," she told people. "Perfect tuning makes me play too carefully. This way, I have to feel it, instead of calculating it. On the 10th anniversary of her first performance, Emma was invited back to Harmony Prime. The council wanted to commemorate what they were now calling the Awakening. That's what they called the moment when the galaxy remembered what it meant to feel. The ceremony was huge. Representatives from all 47 original species attended, plus dozens of species that had joined the council since. The chamber was packed. Emma walked in and saw how much everything had changed. The Velkari section was full of fractured members, their crystalline bodies glittering with intentional flaws. The Thrin delegates were smiling and talking animatedly, so different from the silent, emotionless beings who had sat there 10 years ago. The Zephans flickered and pulsed with natural rhythm. Every species looked more alive, more present, more real than they had before. Gelvar greeted Emma with what could only be described as a hug, something Velkari had never done before the Awakening. "Thank you for coming, Emma. Thank you for everything you gave us." "I just played a song," Emma said, the same thing she always said. "You did so much more than that," Gelvar replied. "But let me show you something." He led her to a special section of the chamber that had been set up for the ceremony. There, in a preservation field, was her father's guitar. The same battered wooden instrument with 3 strings. It looked exactly as it had the day she donated it. Time couldn't touch it in the preservation field. But surrounding it were dozens of other instruments. Velkari resonators with intentional cracks. Thrin organs that had been modified to produce imperfect sounds. Zephan light generators that flickered irregularly. Cormac pulse devices that introduced random variations. Each one was an instrument that had been deliberately made imperfect in homage to what Emma had taught them. "We call this the Wall of Living Expression," Zelvar said. "Every instrument here was created after your performance. Every one of them carries intentional flaws, and every one of them has been used to create music that moved someone, that made them feel something real. This is your legacy, Emma." Emma stood there, looking at the display, and felt tears forming in her eyes. Her father would have loved this. He would have understood it immediately. This was what he had tried to tell her all those years ago when he first taught her to play. Music wasn't about perfection, it was about connection. The ceremony began with speeches from various delegates. They talked about how their societies had changed, how art had evolved, how they had learned to embrace vulnerability and imperfection, how they had remembered what it meant to be alive. Then came the musical performances, but these weren't like the performances from 10 years ago. These weren't demonstrations of technical superiority. These were beings sharing themselves. A young Velkari named Talwen performed a piece on a deliberately cracked resonator. The cracks made the sound unpredictable, sometimes wavering, sometimes splitting into harmonics that shouldn't exist. But she had learned to work with the imperfections, to make them part of the music. She sang a song about her family's grief when they lost their home world to a natural disaster 200 years ago. It was a story that had been passed down through generations, but never expressed emotionally until now. When she finished, half the chamber was crying. Kelmoth performed a piece about experiencing emotion for the first time. His bioacoustic organs produced sounds that were technically imperfect, but emotionally devastating. He sang about 3,000 years of not feeling, and then suddenly, feeling everything all at once. About the overwhelming joy and pain of being truly alive. His voice cracked and broke, just like Emma's had 10 years ago. And it was beautiful. A group of young Zephans created a collaborative piece where they let their light forms merge and separate, responding to each other's emotions in real time. There was no plan, no script, no predetermined outcome. Just beings connecting with each other through color and light and shared feeling. It was chaotic and imperfect and absolutely mesmerizing. Performance after performance showed the same thing. Beings from across the galaxy had learned to be vulnerable, to share their pain and joy and fear and hope, to create art that came from somewhere real inside themselves. Finally, it was Emma's turn. She had been asked to perform again to close the ceremony. She walked to the center of the stage, the same place she had stood 10 years ago. But this time, she wasn't a frightened child. She was a woman who had seen her simple song change a galaxy. She carried her newer guitar, the one with all 6 strings tuned slightly wrong. She adjusted the strap and looked out at the assembled delegates. So many faces, so many different kinds of beings, all of them waiting to hear what she would play. 10 years ago, I stood here and played my father's song, Emma began. I was so scared. I thought I would embarrass Earth. I thought everyone would laugh at me and my broken guitar. I had no idea what was going to happen. She paused, remembering. My father died in space, exploring the unknown. He died doing what he loved. And before he left, he taught me that music was about connection, about reaching across the darkness and letting someone know they're not alone. Emma looked around the chamber. I see what you've all built here. I see how you've changed, how you've learned to embrace imperfection, how you've remembered how to feel. And I want to play you a new song. Not about loss this time, about what comes after loss, about how we continue, about how we find new connections even when old ones are broken. She began to play. The song was more complex than what she had played before. She had been practicing for 10 years after all, but it still had that quality of honest imperfection. The strings still wavered slightly. Her voice still cracked on the high notes. But now, these imperfections felt intentional, meaningful. They were part of her voice, part of her story. The song was about the journey she had been on since her father died, about learning to play his guitar, about standing on this stage 10 years ago, about traveling across the galaxy and meeting beings from 100 different worlds, about learning that grief doesn't end, but it changes. It becomes part of who you are. And if you're brave enough, you can share it with others. And in sharing it, you become less alone. When she finished, the chamber was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, every delegate stood. It wasn't the formal acknowledgement of technical achievement. It wasn't polite applause. It was something more. It was recognition, understanding, connection. Jelvar came to the stage. His fractured crystalline form was glowing with colors that meant deep emotion. Emma Rodriguez, you came to us with 3 loose strings and taught us more than our perfect machines ever could. You showed us that imperfection is not something to be eliminated, but something to be embraced. That vulnerability is not weakness, but courage. That being real is more important than being perfect. He turned to address the entire council. We declare this day, the 10th anniversary of the Awakening, to be an annual holiday across the Galactic Council. We will call it the Day of Living Expression. And every year, we will remember what this young human taught us. That the cracks are where the light gets in. That the song is not in the notes, but in the silence between them. That life, however imperfect, is the point. The chamber erupted in celebration, but not the formal, controlled celebrations that the council used to have. This was real joy, messy and loud and imperfect, beings from 47 worlds laughing and crying and hugging and sharing their stories. Emma stood in the middle of it all, holding her guitar, and thought about her father. How proud he would have been. Not just of her, but of what she had sparked. He had always believed that music could change the world. He had been right. It had just taken 3 loose strings and his daughter's courage to prove it. Later that night, Emma stood alone in front of the preservation field holding her father's guitar. The old instrument looked so small, so humble, compared to all the sophisticated technology that surrounded it. But it had done something that no perfect machine ever could. It had reminded a galaxy what it meant to be alive. Emma placed her hand against the preservation field. She couldn't touch the guitar anymore, but she could feel it. Could remember what it had felt like under her fingers. Could remember playing it that first time, scared and sad and honest. I miss you, Dad, she whispered. But I think I understand now what you were trying to teach me. It's not about the music. It's about what the music carries. Love and loss and joy and pain and everything that makes us real. Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for giving me the courage to stand up there and share it. The guitar sat silently in its field, 3 strings and all. A symbol of everything the galaxy had learned. That perfection wasn't the goal. That authenticity mattered more than technique. That one honest voice could echo across the stars and remind everyone listening that they weren't alone in the darkness. Emma picked up her own guitar and walked outside, onto one of Harmony Prime's observation decks. Through the transparent walls, she could see space. Billions of stars. Thousands of worlds. And somewhere among them, the Unity's final position, where her father's ship had been lost, where he had died. But he wasn't really gone. Not entirely. He lived in the music she played, in the lessons she had learned from him, in the change she had brought to the galaxy in his name, and in the simple truth that he had taught her all those years ago. Music is how we reach across the darkness and remind each other that we're still here, still alive, still real. Emma sat down and began to play. Not for an audience this time. Just for herself. Just for her father. Just for the joy of making something imperfect and honest and true. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, 3 strings and a child's voice carried a message that perfect machines could never send. A message that said, "We are here. We are flawed and broken and beautiful, and we are alive." This time, every delegate in the chamber cried openly, not because they were disrupted or confused, but because they understood now what was happening. They were connecting with another being across the vast darkness of space. They were feeling what she felt. They were sharing her loss and her love. They were, for a few minutes, not alone. When the song ended, Emma gently laid the guitar in its preservation case. The case would keep it exactly as it was, 3 strings and all, for millions of years. Future generations would be able to see it and understand what had happened here. How a child with a broken instrument had taught the galaxy to embrace imperfection. How humans had brought not their most advanced technology, but their most honest selves. How 3 loose strings had made music that perfect machines never could. The display plaque that the council created read, "Evidence that imperfection in service of genuine expression exceeds perfection in service of itself. What makes us imperfect makes us real. What makes us real makes us alive. And life, however imperfect, is the point." "Thank you," the young Velkari said. "You gave me permission to feel things I thought I wasn't supposed to feel. You reminded me that being alive means being imperfect, and that's beautiful." Emma smiled. "My dad would have liked you. He always said the best people were the ones who weren't afraid to be themselves." "Will you play again for us?" the young Velkari asked. "I want to hear more of your music. I want to learn what it means to be real." And so Emma played. Not on the big stage this time, just sitting in a corner with a small group of aliens gathered around her. She played other songs her father had taught her. Simple songs about Earth and home and love and loss. And every being who listened felt something they hadn't felt in a very long time. They felt alive. Eefully, like he was learning to walk for the first time. He stopped at the edge of the stage and looked up at Emma. His translator struggled to convey what he was trying to say. "Small human child," he finally said, his voice different than it had been before. "What have you done to us?" Emma wiped her eyes with her free hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to upset anyone. I just played my dad's song." "Upset," Jelva repeated the word like he was testing it. "Yes. That is what this is. I am upset. I feel disrupted. Incomplete. Like something inside my structure has cracked." He paused. "I have not felt anything like this in 300 years. Not since we Velkari optimized emotions out of our daily experience. This is not efficient. This is not logical. This is not perfect." He looked around at the other delegates, all of them experiencing the same thing, all of them confused and moved and changed. "But it is real," he said quietly, "and we have forgotten what real feels like." Humans," Lisa put her arm around Emma's shoulders. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" "Scared," Emma admitted, "but also ready. I think Dad would want me to do this." "He would be so proud of you," Lisa said softly. They walked back to their quarters on the station. Emma carried the guitar carefully. Tomorrow she would stand in front of the entire Galactic Council and play her father's song on her father's guitar with only 3 strings. She would compete against machines that could produce perfect sound. But tonight, she practiced one more time. In the small room on the alien station, far from Earth, far from home, Emma Rodriguez played the three strings of her father's guitar and sang softly about stars and loss and love. The sounds were imperfect and incomplete, but they were real, and sometimes real was better than perfect. Emma nodded and took a deep breath. "I'm playing for Dad." "That's right," Lisa said. They sat together in the humans section and watched as the alien delegates continued to arrive and show off their perfect machines. The Velkari resonators hummed with power. The Thrin organs pulsed with life. The Zephin light sound converters painted rainbows in the air. Everything was impressive and intimidating and perfect. And in Emma's lap, the old guitar with three strings sat quietly, waiting for its turn.